So you could turn the sound down just a little bit, I think. Okay. I'm the director of the Lost Skills program, Martha Renfro, for our taping, because we tape this too. And Lost Skills was started last year because we wanted to help people gain skills that make them more independent of convenient shopping and services which they really can do themselves. So also to find ways to save money and, you know, doing things together like you're gardening or, you know, anything else really helps bring families together too. And because they're collectively meeting the needs of their household. It's very good for children to be raised that way too. Also to find ways, to give opportunity to teach our children these skills and to improve our health. Because when we're active doing a lot of these things, we're really in better health. So, one thing I want to do before we get into this, I want to have prayer because I'm a little bit nervous, and I want to be able to get things across to you in the right way so that you will understand it. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you so much that you brought us together today for the Lost Skills program. Lord, I just thank you so much for the garden and the way you make our things grow from just a little tiny seed. It's such a miracle. Please help me as I explain things today, that things will be clear and that each one of our participants will want to go home and start a garden, and will be able to do that well. Thank you, Lord, for your blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so why grow your own food or start your own seeds? This one was done last year. We talked about starting seeds, and you'll see that. I'll mention it in a little bit. You'll see that those are online programs that you can watch. So one is nutrition and knowledge of what is in your food. You know, you never know in the grocery store what's in all this packaged stuff. And when you can grow it yourself, not only that, the foods that you grow outside and that you grow yourself, especially when you're going to be using techniques that we're going to talk about today, you will grow even better tasting food, even better tasting vegetables than what you will find in the grocery store. And it's more cost effective. You get exercise, sunlight, and fresh air, and you get a real sense of accomplishment. Thank you, that's a good idea. Also, learning is good for your brain. And believe me, I've been doing a lot of learning in the last few weeks, and it is good for the brain. So there's so much to learn from nature and how God has created it all, and it all works together, and it's just amazing. So, as I mentioned before, we talked about gardening last year, and Corey Ann was one of our guests last year, and she got the bug, and she really started gardening. And so we've asked her to come up and talk about how things went with her garden.
Gardened for about 4 years now. This will be my 4th year this summer. And last year was my first successful garden. I've taken on a few of the classes that Martha and Melody had last year for Lost Skills. And it was so beneficial. I learned a lot through them. I even went to the canning class as well. And the canning class was super knowledgeable. And my intent with gardening is to preserve. So I really just wanted to have the intention to grow as much food as possible and to also preserve as much as possible. I also have my garden in a pool, which is not really the theme that people choose to have a garden in. So the previous owner, when we bought the house, they had the pool kind of filled in. They were done using it, and it was filled in with sand. So sand's not really a great soil to use to grow food in. So we had compost. My partner Luke went and got compost from Organic Resources in South Bend. It was like 5 yards of compost, and we layered it on the sand. We tilled it, and then I also put in amendments of alfalfa and kind of covered it for probably like 3 weeks. And it kind of created what I learned from you guys last year is like a greenhouse effect, and also protected it from like the weeds. So that really helped. And after that, I downloaded this app called Planter, which was really helpful. I was able to take the measurements of the pool and put it into this app. And it really did the square footage, so I knew exactly where the cucumbers were going to grow or the tomatoes were going to grow, things like that. And I'm very visual, so I really needed to see where everything was going to be at. Also, I learned through you guys as well is that companion planting is like the way to go, in my opinion. Planting things that do really well next to each other. So Luke built some cattle fences for the trellises, which was really neat, which I learned from you guys last year too. Kind of expensive, but you can kind of recycle them. So we take them down every year, or at least last year we did, and we stored them away for winter, so that kind of protected them, along with the T-posts that you can kind of see with the cucumbers here. So it just grew up that too, which was really neat to see and pretty. Yeah, I had a lot of cucumbers. And so the things that I planted that I knew were going to kind of need a lot of space, like on the left is watermelon. I would plant those on the edge of the pool instead of planting it in the middle, just because I knew it needed a lot of space. So instead of having the vines grow into my cucumbers or my cabbage or my lettuce, I just would put them on the edge, and like along with my pumpkins as well, I did that. And then on here, you can kind of see it looks really packed, but there is some space. Over here is tomatoes. I kind of used your method, Melody, a little bit, but we tweaked it a little bit, and we used these like wired, I don't know what they were, but we kind of like glued them together with like plumbing PVC pipes or something like that. And it kind of created, so what we did is we put the string around the tomatoes and then would tie it to the metal, and it kind of held the tomatoes up in the air a little bit more. The one thing that I learned last year is I think it's called suckering. I'm going to sucker more because my tomatoes turned into bushes. And that created, and I don't think they really like being too close to each other, so I think that really didn't do so well, but I had a lot of tomatoes, so I'm not complaining. Did they ripen? Yeah, so that's one thing I learned from last year, amongst many things that I learned. You can see in the background, too, is I have sunflowers in the very back there. I don't think I'm going to plant the sunflowers in my garden. I think I'll put them around it just because it casts shade. And so there's a lot of, like my lettuce or my carrots or tomatoes, it was casting shade upon the other vegetables that really needed all the sun possible. So that's one thing I will also not plant in my garden. This is all from mostly seeds as well. So I think the tomatoes and the green peppers were the ones that I did buy from a store, but the rest of them I just put in the soil around Mother's Day. And it kind of took off from there. And so these are my pumpkins, and I'm not really sure what the white is on the leaves. I would assume that's some kind of...
Well, I think that's the type of vegetable it is, whatever pumpkin or squash it was.
Oh, okay.
Some of them have a little white pattern on it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I always thought that was some kind of like disease of some sort. I mean, I had a
Well,
lot
you
of pumpkins.
can have diseased ones, but no, yeah. Like kind of watermelon has kind of two-tone too a lot of times, yeah.
Yeah, so those are my pumpkins. So I grew those on the other side so they can kind of just take over where it wouldn't take over the middle of the garden, wouldn't take over the tomatoes or the corn. I grew corn as well, so it kind of just grew away from everything. And I kind of trained the vines to kind of go off from the pool instead of inside of the center of the pool.
Talk about the nasturtiums.
The what? Oh, yeah. So those are flowers. Yeah, so I just planted those next to my pumpkins because you can actually do companion planting with flowers as well. So vegetables and fruits love certain types of flowers. And on that app, which was really cool and very helpful for me, was that I was able to see what could be planted next to each other versus what couldn't, or what they recommended not planting next to each other. And so one of these flowers loved pumpkins, and so it really helped.
Yeah, and take note of the nasturtiums because we're going to be talking about that with our companion planting today.
Have you eaten the blossom?
I have not.
It's like a peppery.
Yes.
Nice and sour.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
you can eat the blossoms of nasturtiums, and it kind of gives a little peppery taste, in your salads or whatever you make.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more for, like, I thought just companion, or the birds or the bees and things like that.
And bees like them too, yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of see, too, is, like, my landscaping mesh, I used it from the aisles, which that is not so, it wasn't too expensive, but it can be expensive, the landscaping mesh. So what I did around the plants is I just used grass clippings to kind of like keep the weeds at bay, which did
Perfect.
really help at some points. And I learned that through you guys last year too, is using that. And one thing too is like, I want my garden to be pretty, but I really just wanted to grow food.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, is there one more? Oh yeah, gotta have the harvest.
yeah, so my pickles, I had cucumbers for days. I was giving them away over at work. Anybody who would really take it, because I was eating like 2 or 3 of them a day. And my peppers, my watermelons, I had like, there is a picture in there that I had, it's like 20 pounds of a watermelon.
Yes, right there.
And my tomatoes, that was like the first batch I made, which this is all really new for me. And so when I took the canning class, I learned physically how they had like you guys had hands-on how to, I think it's blanching.
Well, we did the blanching and we did the canning and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to be addressing canning later in the summer this year. It'll be more in August. We did it in July last year. But we may find a time that if we have enough people who want to do just a hands-on class, it takes about 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours. And we just do it right here, So if we have enough people, we will do that again this year. Okay, let's see, Yep,
And then my green peppers, those, I texted you one day.
She called me one day.
Yeah,
Well,
'cause
I guess I called her back because I was on my way driving. And she said, what do I do with all these peppers? I said, chop them up and freeze them.
Yeah, and we used them for a while. Yeah, we just put them in the freezer, and he's the main cook in the house, so he would pull them out when he would want to cook with
And
it.
they're very, they're not only economical, but they're efficient. I mean, they're right there.
Yeah. And they're
Yeah.
cut already, and
Ready to go.
yeah, and it didn't seem like, I always thought it would be soggy, like the green peppers would become soggy or something like that.
Not
but
when you cook them.
yeah.
Last in the freezer.
That was in August when I put them in there, and I think we probably used them all up, but by like what, January?
I still have some in my freezer.
Yeah.
They'll last a good year.
Peppers that way. So
Yeah.
I just keep them whole, pull them out, cut, take the seeds out,
Yep. Yeah, they tasted fine. They tasted fresh.
And if you freeze them whole, or you half them and take the seeds out, and then just put halves in the freezer, it does work. It's a little bit harder, not hard to, they soften up a little bit within 5 minutes, and you can chop them up, Yep. Very
Yeah.
good.
So I learned a lot. I didn't really know what I was doing last year. I've had a few gardens in between, but last year was like my first successful garden, and I'm very thankful. So thank
Very
you
good.
for
Oh,
offering
you're
these
welcome.
classes. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's so neat to hear. Okay, very good. And let's see here. So one thing I wanted to let you know, and you'll have it you should have it in your handout too at the back, I believe, or somewhere. We'll come across it in the handout. How to find out about the lost skills that we did last year. And I don't remember, Emily, when I told you I hadn't discovered the better way. All you have to do is Google Lost Skills Edwardsburg. It goes right to that page. And it goes right there, so you can you'll see this Lost Skills classes from last year when you do that, when you Google, okay? And then I just have to show you, okay, so I'm a gardener. I've gardened most of my life. And Melody over here, she's kind of not consulting. We're just good friends. We do things back and forth, and she's a great gardener also. So if you hear her talking up, that's why. Now, one thing that I want to do, and I think Alice probably has in your folders, I would like you, maybe if Alice can bring in some cards, I would like you to use a 3x5 card. We're going to be going through a lot of really intense things that we're going to be talking about. It's not beginner exactly today, it's more intermediate, how to do your garden soil and stuff like that. But I would like for you to write down your questions, and we'll take them at the end. 2 reasons: it just interrupts my thought process. 2 is that we're taping, and then we want to record everybody's thing. But what I wanted to show you, Melody's garden. She has a beautiful garden there, and here's another one. You saw that probably on the flyer for this month, if you had got the flyer.
Underneath, those are cattle guards, 16-foot going sideways. And the spacing under that, I learned the hard way, you need to have that, or the weeds are hard to get out.
To have
You
what?
don't have to have it that high off the ground, but it needs to be enough that you can get a hoe. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
have your hands.
So the where you have the cattle panels,
Yeah.
you should have them higher here so that you can hoe underneath them.
So you don't want to take them down here.
Yeah,
You want them up high enough that you can
yeah.
get to weeds.
And
These can stay there indefinitely, because these don't rust.
right. So notice here also that she has companion planting going on here with the peppers and tomatoes, whatever, and she has the marigolds in there too. So we'll be talking about that later.
2023 gardening.
Oh, okay.
I have plenty left if anybody wants one. Grab your
So we have, that's one of them. I have the other one. That's from April, and I have the March one at home, which I didn't bring. So what we're passing out right now is the 2023, April 2023 garden handout. So if you are going back to listen to any of the programs, you can look at that one. Okay. One more, she has her tomatoes here, all nicely trellised up, And she has a nifty way, and we'll have to tell you later how she does that. It's a real nifty way of trellising. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing, we're going to be focusing on gardeners with more experience. But those of you who haven't had as much experience, let's see, how many of you really consider yourselves beginner gardeners? Okay, no, you're not. Okay, and how many of you have had a garden for more than 1 year? There. Okay, very good. And so you're a little bit more experienced. And so we're going to be covering some topics that will help you improve your garden, but even the beginners can pick up on some of these things and do this from the beginning. Okay, so I don't claim to be an expert. I am studying just like any of you and trying to learn more about gardening. I've been doing a lot of studying of articles from articles, YouTube videos, podcasts, and stuff like that. So that's where I've gotten a lot of my stuff from today, and I hope that it's helpful to you. So we're going to talk about soil health. So the definition of soil health is the ability for soil to function. Boy, that's kind of broad, isn't it? But what's the function of soil? What are we trying to get it to do? We're trying to get it to grow good plants, to fruitful, but also tasty, okay? And disease-free. So what do you have to do that? One, the best way to achieve this is to look in nature and see how it is done. What's the function of the soil? It's to promote growth of a particular plant, provide nutrients needed, and provide nutrients needed by that plant. You do want your soil to be soft and to have lots of microbes in it. There's a whole lot of work going on underneath the soil by little things that you can hardly see. And so you really need to have those working for you. So the principles of soil health, one is soil coverage. And it can be any kind of mulch, broken down wood chips, a thin layer of grass clippings. Corianne had a really good success with that, and that really does help. Now, one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your grass is cut fairly regularly so it's not going to seed. You know, it's not going to be real bad, but you don't want all that extra seed in your crops. You can use landscape cloth. You can use cover crops or anything that covers. You can use newspaper and cardboard if you have something to keep it down. Something to cover your soil. But also another thing, and it'll come out a little bit later, compost will cover your soil too. And we'll talk more about compost, a little bit more about compost later. Now, one of the reasons that you need to have it covered is to prevent erosion, because if you have a big rainstorm, it's just going to wash it, especially if you have any kind of a slope, it's going to wash it away. It also keeps the soil warmer or cooler, depending on, you know, if it's cold outside, you know, it protects it and keeps it warmer. If it's warm outside, the ground is cooler. It keeps soil from compacting. And that's one of the things you want to make sure that it's not compacting, so it protects that. Also, it protects and may even feed the microbial activity. Most often it'll kind of feed the microbial activity underneath the soil. You may have a cover crop in the winter for some of your beds. Maybe there's one that everything's out of it by late August, early September, and you can throw some seeds of a cover crop, and we'll talk about that more later, over that bed. But then things that you're still harvesting from later into October, you may have to just put either wood chips or leaves or something else over those areas. During growing season, the soil is not covered, and the soil that isn't covered by plants, if your plants are far away from each other, and this is one thing I did when I planted my broccoli and my cabbage and stuff like that, there's space, when they're a little plant, there's space in between them, and so I put grass clippings on them, and that helped keep the weeds down when they were far apart. As the plants get bigger, then they will shade the ground around them, and they won't have as much weed pressure there. But during the growing season, like I said, grass clippings or broken down wood chips. You don't want fresh wood chips. The reason you don't want fresh wood chips right in your garden is because they will take nitrogen out of it will require nitrogen to start breaking them down, and that'll take it from your soil. So I have a pile of wood chips that have been sitting out there for several months, and they're breaking down, and I can use those in my garden. Also, some people use landscape fabric, they'll put landscape fabric out and burn holes in them, to plant their plants in them. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, about how I feel about that. But also, some people will put landscape fabric in their walkways. I think Melody does that, and you did that too, So that keeps weeds down there. Some people also in their walkways will just put wood chips. And that's where you can use your fresh wood chips in your walkways. That'll be fine. If you use the broken down ones, you're going to be replacing them soon, because as they break down, they make dirt. And what happens when you have dirt? A seed falls in it, right? and a lot of times the weed seed, so then it grows up. Okay, so number 2 on our principles of soil health is diversity above and below. Above and below ground. You don't feed the soil the same diet all the time. If you did one thing year after year after year, some things can do that. I know one expert gardener who, just because of where it was kind of out of the way, he just planted potatoes in one spot. He, of course, put a lot of extra nourishment in that area. And potatoes, if you've ever grown potatoes, when you dig the potatoes, you're probably not going to get all of them. That little tiny one like that is going to sprout up because you didn't see it. It's going to sprout up next year with another potato. So that's not all a bad thing to do, but I'm getting so I want to move them a little bit, here and there. But growing different crops each year does help. Some people do not rotate their crops, and like I said, they put more amendments on them. Amendments would be fertilizers, or not necessarily chemical, but you know, whether some manure or, you know, compost and stuff like that they can put on them. What you have to do, you kind of have to see what works for you. What works for you? Do you like to move the stuff, you know, and some people just have it here and then they move it here, and, you know, and whatever was here comes back over here, you know. But then when we talk about diversity, also livestock integration is included in diversity. Now, you know, in nature, livestock feed the soil. Way back in the prairies, you know, the buffalo were roaming the prairies and, of course, leaving their deposits and stuff like that. And that kind of fed the prairie. Well, how about the forests? In the forests, the deer, all the other animals, you know, going through and doing their job too of helping to make sure that they're feeding the soil, you know. And also when in the forests and even on the prairies, you know, the grasses would grow up and then they would die back, you know, and they'd provide nourishment as they decomposed, and the leaves in the forest decompose and provide nourishment. So what you see there, if you go into a wooded area and you dig up, you see this really dark, composted like, you know, dirt, and it can be crumbly. It can be, it's not going to be compacted like your garden area or your lawn or whatever. It's not going to be compacted because it hasn't had all the traffic over it and everything, and it's going to be nice and just right and dark. And also, if you smell that kind of stuff, it's just kind of an earthy smell, you know, good earthy smell. Okay, so in our gardens, we can use composted manures to add to the soil. We can use compost that has been created by layers of different, you know, grass clippings and wood chips and leaves and scraps from your cooking, you know, fresh food scraps and stuff like that. So all of that can be layered and create the compost just like happens in the forest, but you kind of have to make it happen a little bit. But we can learn from that. Oh, by the way, manures, most manures can be kind of hot. They have to be composted. Some, like chicken manure, has a lot of ammonia in it and all that stuff, and it can burn your plants. So you don't want to put chicken manure right on, or even cow manure or horse manure. They have to be, usually, you know, you get it with the straw in it and stuff like that, their bedding. And it has to be composted. Put in a pile somewhere where it's not going to bother you, and let it sit for a few months, sometimes up to a year. But some things don't take quite that long. But the good news, now I wouldn't have them just for that, but a lot of people do. Rabbits are, their poop is not hot. And you can put it right on your garden. It will not cause a problem at all. Also, there's livestock under the ground. Tons of livestock under the ground. You can't see them. But it's all these little microbes and stuff that are under there working. These can be fed by covering the ground with newspaper or cardboard and covered with leaves or wood chips. In fact, the type of gardening I did just a few years ago, I do a form of it right now, but the kind of gardening that I did a few years ago was back to Eden gardening. And you mow your lawn. If there's any thistles, you want to take them out because they'll grow right up through anything. But other than that, it's not too bad. Dandelions, if you have a ton, you might want to do something about that. But you just mow your lawn, and you put cardboard or several layers of newspaper on the ground. And then you put about 6 inches of compost. And as Corianne mentioned, you can get it at South Bend Resources, and I think in your handout you have some more information about stuff like that. At South Bend Resources, you can get these the compost basically free if you have a way of hauling it in a pickup. It's like $4, isn't it? It was. $4, and they take a scoop of a yard and dump it in your pickup, and off you go. That works out pretty nice. You can take buckets and stuff there. There's a place where you can just scoop it up into your buckets. It costs me a little bit more just because I want a lot and at one time. So I have a friend that I hire with his dump truck, Alex, to bring me a big dump truck load. So, but you can cover the ground with newspaper or cardboard, and then you put your other dirt on top of it. Or if you just want to cover it with something else, and that will weight the cardboard and the newspaper down, then so it won't fly. You can cover it that way too, if you're not adding compost, dirt. But the problem is, the whole purpose of it is to shut out the weeds and to let those microbes work underneath there, okay? And they will start working, even if you have dirt on it. They're going to work into it, and then they're going to come up. They're going to eat the newspaper. They're going to eat the cardboard. Pretty soon, within a few months, you're not going to see that there, and they're going to be coming right up into your soil. If you cut off the plants when you're cleaning your garden in the fall, if you just cut your plants off, don't pull the root out, but leave the root there. You can just, if it's not a diseased plant, you could just lay it down and let it cover the ground. And you have two things happening there. It's covering it so that you aren't going to get the weeds, but it also gives food for those microbes, and they'll come up and they'll take some of it down in, okay? Not only that, your root that you left in the ground kind of gives more structure to it, and it allows more air to be underground rather than compacting where it was, And so all of that is good stuff to do. Now, I didn't, until a couple years ago, I didn't know you could just cut them off. I always pulled them out, But it does work. And sometimes, so the next year when you're planting, you might see it there. If it's bothering you, if it's in a place where you really want to plant something, pull it out, If not, you can leave it there and plant around it. So it does help. Okay. Okay, now we're going to go on to minimizing of soil. Oh, one thing I wanted to say on the diversity below the ground, those microbes and everything. The first time, especially when you put dirt in this deep and on top of the cardboard and stuff, the first time you see earthworms in there, you're jumping up and down, right? You're just so excited to see those earthworms. And I've been digging holes for a tree, to plant a tree, and I'll see earthworms and I replace them to my garden. So it's exciting to see that. Okay, so you want to minimize the disturbance of your soil. When I grew up, my dad tilled, maybe even with a tractor, big tractor, and tilled the whole garden. And then in between, when the weeds were coming up and everything, take the rototiller out in between the small rototiller, in between all the rows and stuff like that. And I mean, that it was always tilled and hoed, Nothing was covered, nothing, I'm not blaming him at all. I'm just saying things have changed so much. I was telling my mother, my dad loved reading books and stuff like that on gardening. He died in 1989. And I tell you, if he lived today with the internet, he would have been gardening a whole lot different. I just know it. So, tillage continues to break down the organic matter, and the microbes no longer have much to eat. So if you're tilling all the time, then it just breaks things apart. All that organic matter, all the stuff that they've done in, since the last time you tilled or whatever, they might have tried to work, but there's not as much to eat. The organic matter isn't there. So it is so much better to not till a whole lot. I don't till at all, and all I do is as little disturbance as possible. I'll hoe a little bit. Of course, I'm weeding the quack grass and stuff like that out of my beds, but I'll tell you more of what I learned this morning about that. Okay, but I've also heard people just recently saying tilling is not bad, but just limited, like at the beginning of the year or whatever, if you need to till, because it's just, especially when you're just starting a garden that might be in clay or in something like that, you got to get the stuff down in there somehow, But as you go along, you may find that, maybe in 2 years, you really don't have to, because that soil is softer and you can, just do it with a hoe or something like that. So, okay. And so you can think of it this way. Tilling and no-till are two of the tools you have in your pocket, when you're doing your garden. Okay, well, do I think I need to till? Yeah, it's really compacted and everything. Well, maybe I'll till right now, at the beginning of the year. But then later on, you don't need to do it. And like I said, next year or the next year, maybe you see you don't. So just think of them as tools that you have in your pocket.
Would you till because of an overgrowth of weeds?
If you till because you have an overgrowth of weeds, you're just making more weeds, right?
Yeah, and you have to be careful, because the reason why they say not to till, except for maybe the very first time if you want to, is because it actually can compact.
Yes.
And there are pathways that the mycorrhizal and the worms and all those that make, and they connect with each other. And when there's chemical communication and there's sharing of if you break that up, you can decrease that function. And if you think about it, there is some damage that happens to the microorganisms too. And
Yeah.
so they're not as plentiful. So if you're able to at all possible, it's better to layer so that you are covering. So as you're smothering, you know, like let's say the weeds come up after you've done your newspaper and your you know, after you've smothered.
Cardboard, yeah.
Right, and so then the next time, if you get some weeds that get out of control, you just cover them again. You just repeat until they're not there anymore.
Not only that, like when you're tilling, you're tearing them apart. If you have quack grass in there,
Just
you're gonna
pull
have
it
10
out.
times as much. You just tear it up and it's in little pieces and it'll come up.
A really good example, if you could look up Charles Dowding, he's a UK gardener, and he's had decades and decades of doing no-till gardening.
And you'll see that on your...
We were going to do a little 5-minute excerpt, but we couldn't get it working on the computer. So
Right.
if you look it up, it's on the last page review that information. Some of that's there. If you just use his name, and he'll explain it better.
Yeah.
But if you can avoid the tilling, you'll have better results and faster. The biggest thing is just that first year especially, stay right on top of the weeds.
Yeah.
What you don't want is any of those weeds to go to seed.
Right. The biggest thing is get them out before they're going to seed. And I'm going to ask people to hold questions till later. Write them down if you can, so we can get through this. But that is totally true. Smother them, you know, that's what I try to do. And I just try to stay ahead of the game and cover your pathways. If you're having weeds in your pathway, cover right up to where your plants are so that you don't have as much place where you can have weeds. You know, cover it with either wood chips or cardboard or landscape fabric or whatever you can to really keep having those weeds. So now another thing is continual living root and plant in your soil. You want something living in your soil as much as possible. And this is going to, we're going to talk more about it when we talk about cover crops. Cover crops provide living plant grabbing photosynthesis. So, you know, it's not just soil that's not covered. It has living roots in them. It's not just covered either. It has something living, and the plants will take photosynthesis down into their roots and then be able to distribute it or, you know, store it. It can be stored for when it's needed. So all of these points help us see that we need to mimic nature. We need to have a cover over our over the ground. And our soil needs organic matter. It needs that, the stuff that, organic matter can be anything that has been living, you know, and it's breaking down, and that's good organic matter. Okay, so benefits of organic matter. See this soil? This is really good soil. That's not mine. I found it somewhere. I found the picture.
Did you buy it?
I found the picture. Okay, so organic matter physically enhances aggregate ability. Aggregate ability is the ability for the soil to kind of hold together, but yet also not be compacted. Okay, and this is this is what that is. Okay, let's see, and it allows water and air to come in because it's not compacted. It allows water and air. It helps, organic matter helps reduce the stickiness of clay soil. So when you have real clay soil, you want to add a lot of organic matter, and that can be compost, or it can be, that's putting your grass clippings on it, so the next time you're digging in, it's going down, and it's also decomposing there. Also, it reduces surface crusting, because if some clay soils and compacted soils just get a real bad crust on them. And it helps with seed bed preparation. It helps soften the soil. You don't want to plant in really hard ground, because it's not going to do any good. But here, you know that your germinated seed has a place to put down roots, and it can come up through the soil easily. The leaves can come up through the soil. It also helps to increase soil cation exchange capacity. I learned this last week. Cation exchange capacity is, cations are like calcium, magnesium, potassium, nitrogen, all of those are cations, okay? And when you have good organic matter, it helps the root to be able to take up those elements, okay? If you don't have really good organic matter in your soil, then those elements might be there, and you'll see it in a little bit. Those elements might be there, but the root can't take it up, okay? And those are the essential nutrients, so you want those to be available to the plants. Okay, so we'll talk more about some of that stuff late in a bit. What is a weed? I know. It's not growing in the place you want it, is it? But the thing is, so many of the weeds, a lot of them, we did a foraging class last year, and a lot of weeds are edible, and some weeds are helpful, And not only that, when we talk about cover crops, they're good for us. But you know what? If they go to seed and they start dropping their seeds, what do you think they're going to become to us? Weeds. Because they're growing where we don't want them to grow. So, there are many weeds. Let's see, I guess I talked about that. So one thing you want to do is you want to observe what kind of weeds are growing in your soil, in your garden. What kinds of weeds? I've heard other people say, well, if you watch for dandelions where they grow, you'll know kind of what's going on. And I didn't understand that totally. And like Melody says, it's not totally true, but it can give you an indication. If you have a ton of dandelions growing somewhere, it could be compacted soil, because dandelions, they put a root down. Other plants won't be able to grow there, but a dandelion doesn't have quite as much trouble because they can put a good taproot down. So deep-rooted plants help break up the hard soil. There are some things that we'll talk about in a little bit that you can use as a cover crop that grow deep and stuff, and you grow them in compacted soil to help break it up. So there's an article, and I forgot to pick up my packet of papers I had at home, but you will see, you have it in your handout here, where it says what are weeds on the first page. There is a thing from MSU, an article, Weeds Are an Indicator of the Soil's Health, put out by the MSU Extension Office. And I'll tell you what, one thing I learned this morning was that, let me see if one thing I learned this morning was that quackgrass is an indicator of an imbalance between magnesium and iron. I'm going, Well, guess what? You'll see in a bit, I had done a soil test. My magnesium is way high, my iron is way low. So I'm wondering if I can get both of those more in the middle range where they should be, if maybe I won't have as much trouble with quackgrass, which I have a lot of. Okay. I wanted to refer to types of weed barriers. Weed fabric, I put pros and cons on your garden handout. You can probably see how I don't really like weed fabric. I've dealt with it. We have a garden out here and I help with it. We have weed fabric. It does help us because we aren't here every day of the week looking at stuff, and it does really help. But you know what? The things that I see is where they cut the X's to be able to plant, or you can, some people burn out where you're going to plant things. Little weeds come up right next to the plant, and it's hard to weed those things out, you know. And so I'm not a total fan of it. But you can see those pros and cons. I'm not going to go through all those. Preferred methods of weed barriers would be newspaper, cardboard, covered with dirt, or wood chips or leaves. You know, you can cover those, and then the cardboard and the newspaper is going to stay in place. And guess what? If you put weed barrier down and you covered it with dirt, it's going to grow because it has dirt on top of it. It's going to grow weeds. They're going to go down in, and it's going to be a mess. So,
You just have to keep it swept off.
yeah, you do have to.
So if you get any debris on it, get that swept off if you can, because once it starts to break down to dirt, it can start growing weeds.
Right.
Weeds aren't usually kind of come up from below unless they're really strong ones that you haven't, unless there's dirt on top. If there's dirt on top, they can come through. And the weeds that are up above can certainly send roots down through that landscape cloth. But if you keep it swept off.
Yeah.
And if you also put it around the border of your garden, and so I like to take it down the down the pathways, and then I leave the strip that I'm going to plant without the landscape cloth. And then that's what I put my compost down and prepare the beds. And that's one way that I still give nutrition to the main area of growing, but I still have the landscape cloth around it and down the rows, so that and where the walkway is.
Yeah, yeah.
To help
That
keep
helps.
the weeds back.
Okay. So there's another source from MSU. It's right under where, on the second page where it says preferred methods of weed barrier. Underneath there's another source for soils. You can look up a little page and tells what all you need to do to improve your soil. It's really good. Okay, I'm going to talk about cover crops now. Cover crops add nutrients and, let's see, get on my right page here. They can be grown before the crop is planted. Like in the fall, you can grow cover crop to go to the next year. They can be planted in between your rows. Like if you have a little space in between rows or something that you're not going to be walking there, you can plant some cover crops in between. And you can plant them, of course, after you harvest. If you're harvesting and then there's nothing going to be planted there for the rest of the year until next spring, put in a cover crop. And there are lots of types of cover crops. People will plant a cover crop in the fall and terminate it in the spring. Usually when they say terminate, they're usually either cutting it down, or in big farms, they have these machines that crimp it, you know, kind of break the stem, and then it doesn't grow any, then it dies. So on beds and fields that are planted in the fall, the cover crop may be planted early spring or summer. Maybe you're saving a spot for your fall garden, you know, where you're going to plant. And we're going to talk about that later in the year. We're going to talk about how you can plant stuff and have things that you can pick in the winter, in the late fall, early winter. But if you're saving that space, you can plant a cover crop in the spring, and then it gives it more nutrition for when you're going to be planting in the fall. And some small cover crops can be planted among the current crop if it stays low enough to the ground. So if you could plant like white clover, which is a short plant, you could plant that and in between your peppers or something that grows bigger, you know, because it's just going to give a cover for the ground. And not only that, clover is like a legume. It gives nitrogen, you know, so you could do something like that. This year, what I'm going to try, and I mentioned a root that, a cover crop that puts down a good heavy root, daikon radishes, okay? And those can get pretty big, and they can get big around too. And so they will, if you have compacted soil, you can plant those, and they'll go down in and they'll just kind of break up that soil. So what I want to do is I want to plant more asparagus. But my native soil is pretty heavy and rocky, and so what I want to do is I'm going to plant the daikon radishes in that row and see if they'll break it up. And then I can dig it up a little easier and in the fall or even next spring and put more asparagus in there. And then what I'm hoping, it sounds funny, but then I'll get more of that dirt and put that high, because asparagus can be planted pretty deep. And I'll put that dirt on top of it. And I saw some people who planted strawberries under the asparagus. And then the strawberries will cover the ground of the asparagus and not have as many weeds. So I don't know. You know, everything is an experiment, right? It is very much. And David, you know, everything's an experiment, right? He's been gardening a lot. They had a really nice garden this last year. So now, where do you? Oh, one thing I want to tell you also on cover crops. On your handout here under Charles Dowding, as Melody said, we have four videos of Charles Dowding. When we're talking about cover crops, watch that #1 video of his. Options of soil fertility. We wanted to have it set up, but we weren't able to get that set up to watch. When we're talking about cover crops, he shows you exactly what we're talking about. What he did, he planted garlic. And then he planted mustard seed in the same bed. The garlic wasn't coming up. You plant garlic in the fall, and it wasn't quite coming up. The mustard seed popped up. Mustard seed got this tall from the table. It got that tall. But you know, your garlic is not really growing. You might have little sprigs of your garlic before it gets cold enough, but you're not going to get that much. But you're feeding it, you're keeping it covered. Frost, a good hard frost comes, the mustard seed goes bloop. The mustard plants go. They just die off. And then, but they're still covering. I mean, they're kind of in the bed still. And then in the spring, the garlic comes up. So that you'll see that. It was a really good example of what a cover crop does, how you would use a cover crop, okay? Okay, so I don't want to do, I wanted to tell you where to get cover crop, and I put that, where did I put that on your thing? Cover crops. Under cover crops in your handout, you'll see True Leaf Market. That's a company that I use. There's many of them. But I find I like them because I get some of my seeds from them anyway. And through them, you can get enough for a field, or you can get enough for some beds, you know. So that's why I like getting it from them. I have right here, I have speckled peas, and you can use that for sprouting, for microgreens, you know, the little greens that you grow inside. Or you can, I saw somebody using these for a cover crop. I have some, and believe me, it takes some planning to do, and I failed last year because I had this to try to do some cover cropping last year, and I didn't get it done. So don't worry if you fail, but you know, the whole thing is just kind of working, trying to improve. This is clover, red clover. This one I thought was interesting, and my mother was asking what kinds was in it. Well, it's listed here. This is a garden cover crop mix, because you know, a lot of times you'll see they'll just put one type of seed over for cover crop. Well, more people are saying, hey, do a diversity, you know, especially if you're doing it over the winter, give it more types of nutrition. And this one is garden cover crop mix, and it has wheat, peas, triticale, daikon radish, some kind of hairy vetch, I think. I'm kind of scared of that one. That can, vetch can become your weed. Rapeseed, another kind of wheat, collards, forage. It's kind of, anyway, there's another clover and mustard in there.
Martha, I was just going to say, if you find something like that, the way you can kill it is just put the landscape cloth over it, or the newspaper or cardboard, and then you kill it off, and then it turns into nutrition, as long as it doesn't go to seed.
Right. And the whole thing is, cut it back before any of it goes to seed. You know, just when you barely start seeing flowers, or even just before that, if it's long enough, cut it off. Yeah. So, okay. I want to go into soil testing just a little bit. How are we doing on time? Okay. I found out this week that there are 2 types of soil testing. And I had ordered my soil test from, that's True Leaf Market, where I got my stuff. I ordered a soil test from Redmond. which I thought was a pretty good company. And then I started wondering, but I found out, yes, they are. So, some people, well, first of all, some people prefer not to test their soil. Some people prefer just to try to put on what they think maybe it needs, or just give it good nutrition, you know, like some nitrogen, or, you know, just kind of feeding stuff back into your soil with your compost and stuff like that. So you can do that, and that's all well and good. Others recommend doing a soil test once a year, and I thought, well, I've never done it, maybe I'll try it this year. But then you have to follow their recommendations that they give on organic fertilizers. I did this test and found my soil is very deficient in several things. And we'll talk about it in a minute. Their recommendations were for chemical application, and I would rather apply more of the organic matter than just the chemicals, you know. And it still might be organic chemicals and stuff like that, but I just would like, you know, more of the organic matter. So I've been researching that. Now, here are the results of my soil test. Excuse me. And you can Google Redmond soil test if you want that. Here you see the very tall ones are phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium. You see how my magnesium is? I told you, and my iron is way down here. What is really killing me is my nitrogen is way down here. And so I was wondering, what about this, you know? And I also found out about the MSU has soil tests, and so I ordered one. It hasn't come in the mail yet. I thought it would be here by yesterday. And I thought, well, maybe I'll compare them, because I was going like, what in the world? But while I was thinking about that, I emailed Redmond, and I asked them, oh, I know why I emailed them, because they didn't have the percentage of organic matter or the cation exchange capacity, CEC. And those were two things that the podcast I was listening to was saying, you need to know these two things. And so I wrote to them and I said, what is it? I don't see these, am I, you know? And he told me that the way they test it, and he obviously was a soil scientist, the way he found out that you can get these ion something or other, and anyway, it's their testing, whatever.
Is it like a meter?
Not a meter, but agent, the testing agent or whatever you could get. And not I could get, but that was available, they found out. And so now what they do, with those that agent, it helps them to measure each of these, not what is in the soil, but what is available to the plant. So this ion thing acts like a synthetic root. And so what these are, this just doesn't mean that my soil is really low in nitrogen. It means that there's apparently not enough organic matter or whatever to make it available to it. So they recommended that I use a 5-0-5 fertilizer, 5 of nitrogen, 0 of phosphorus, and 5 of potassium. That would be okay. I think I'm going to, but my beds are 4 feet wide and 40 feet long, and it'll take me a whole jug, which costs $25 to do one bed, and I have 6 right now with wanting more. So what I'm going to do, I think, is just do one of those, but then try with some of my other beds to find other ways, like what I've been adding, because before I learned about that, I've been adding alfalfa pellets. I used I burned the limbs in my yard and stuff like that, and I used a little bit of that potash, to put out. So just different things like that. I'm trying to find ways that I can do it more organically, but to at least get one bed started, see what's going to happen, see if that'll work. Now, and I told you about the two kinds of soil tests. MSU does it the old way, where they just they have the organic matter in there. It tells about organic matter and stuff, but it will be interesting. I do want to do theirs. Okay, Redmond cost me $39. MSU cost me $26. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do more, but at least I have some. And then what they will show me is they will just show me the how much is in the soil. So that'll be interesting to see what the numbers look like. This is the other way. So nitrogen is very low, iron very low, zinc and copper are low. Phosphorus is very high. Calcium, magnesium are very high. And they should be in a ratio of 75 to 50%. I believe it's 50%. I was listened to the podcast, and I couldn't figure out. I think it was 50, not 15. But anyway, to give good soil structure. Okay, let me try to get through this. So you have in your handouts, I did put the soil testing links there. And so the big upshot for good soil health is to keep the soil covered. Number one, keep it covered. People who are new at gardening, you have, the advantage that you know that right away and you can try to keep it covered somehow. That can be with mulch, wood chips, leaves, cover crops, grass clippings, and chop and drop plants. Chop your plants off, drop them down. If they're not diseased, you can do that. Also, you always have to replenish the soil. It's kind of like a bank account. You want to replenish it. Sometimes personal knowing through experimentation is more effective than the information that you get. You learn so much by experience. But you can read books and all that kind of stuff, but when you actually put it into practice, that's when you learn so much more. Now we want to talk about companion planting really quick here. So I think I gave you most of the information that I have in my thing here, so you can at least see it on your handout. And so what is companion planting? It's taking certain plants, planting them side by side for mutual benefit. Okay, Corianne talked a lot about that. One thing it does, that was Charles Dowding. You get those. Okay. One thing is pest control. Deterring pests or attracting beneficial insects. That was very interesting to me. Plant marigolds with tomatoes to control certain nematodes. Plant dill or fennel with cabbage, which attracts certain wasps. There are certain wasps that will eat the cabbage worm population. So if you plant dill and fennel, that attracts the wasps, which are going to eat the cabbage worm that's on the cabbage. That's nice. And variety always helps to prevent outbreaks. Let's see. B, increase yields. And I left them up there in case anybody needed to see others. But increased yields promotes healthy plant growth. Companion planting increase yields by promoting healthy plant growth. It helps encourage greater nutrient uptake. It helps keep soil moisture at a better level, which can increase the plant size. How does it keep the soil moisture? Because it's covering it, okay? It's covering the soil. There's not as much evaporation and stuff. It also improves the soil health. Sometimes beans, you see in the fields, they grow corn one year and beans the next year. And, you know, corn really takes up a lot of the nitrogen, but beans put nitrogen in the soil. So sometimes planting corn and beans, you may have heard of the three sisters. You plant corn, beans, and squash, and that's on the list there. Corn, beans, and squash. So the corn provides a trellis for the for the beans. The beans provide the nitrogen for it all, and the squash covers the ground so that you don't have the. So that's what they call the three sisters companion. Okay, and also. You know, the companion planting provides natural mulches. And improved soil health, that's just, we've heard that all along today. Also, the use of insectary plants. Companion planting helps with the use of insectary plants. Marigolds and tomatoes, it helps control the nematodes underneath the ground, okay, which are detrimental to the tomatoes. And then dill and fennel, like we said, attracts the wasp or the cabbage worms. Planting yarrow or chamomile next to strawberries deters spider mites. But you want to be careful a little bit. Chamomile can become your weed. I mean, it'll drop. It's not that it's a bad thing. I have chamomile growing here and there, you know, but it's not a bad thing. And it grows up and, you know, you have the chamomile flowers you can dry for your chamomile tea and stuff like that. Okay. And then nutrient cycling. Beans will produce, beans and corn. You know, that's the way they do the nutrient cycling. Trap crops. This I liked. How many of you have had squash bugs? Yeah. Well, they say plant radishes next to squash to attract squash bugs away from squash plants. I don't know. That's a new one to me. I think I'm going to try that this year. Okay.
Martha, there's one more thing. If you find it, there's certain types of squash that have a tougher outer rind, and then the squash bugs can't really get through, or if it's the type of squash that its juice is really sticky, almost like glue, it'll seal. And then the squash bugs don't really affect them that much. So there's different kinds that you can get that do that.
Yeah. Okay, also to plant crops to attract beneficial insects like lacewings or ladybugs. And I just thought I'd put some pictures up there so you'd know what they were. Because sometimes I don't always know exactly what those, lacewings I wasn't real familiar with. So, okay, so what I would like for you to do, in your packet, there is a post survey. I would like you to take that out and start filling that in. I have some door prizes here. I have some packets of, 5 packets of seeds. And I would like to take your questions. If you want to be in the drawing for the seeds, write your name on the top of or bottom of the page. And then we'll pick those up shortly. Now, this is a time we can have questions and answers if anybody has a question. And thank you. You guys have been great. I've
So
been
we do
able
have
to
a
get through.
question. They did give you another handout here, and this was to
That
a
was-
previous gardening class.
That was last April's gardening class, in case you want to go online and watch it.
And this is the notes from it.
Yeah.
That might be useful
Yeah.
as a reference.
Because I'm not sure if the notes are online, but I know that
I don't think you've got it.
yeah, we wanted to at least give you
Do
those.
we have another, someone's missing a fill-out form.
Oh, another,
Post survey.
Is there
yeah.
anybody else missing the survey?
Okay, in the back, did you have a question or did you need something? I thought your hand was up. Okay. Okay, any questions? Yes, Ruth Ann.
You were talking about grass clippings. I just want to caution anybody putting fresh grass clippings around young plants. They will be killed. You want to
Okay.
make sure that the grass clippings are dried first.
Yeah.
Or keep them a few inches away from young plants.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I did that to a whole patch of watermelon one year. It was very disappointing.
Oh, yes, yes. And the other thing is, you don't want to put them real deep either. Just a little bit, because grass, if you've ever put grass, a whole bunch of grass in one place, it starts matting and it just kind of as it's decomposing, it just gets to be a real big glob and it doesn't do well. So I just put, yeah, and it's a good thing. I think mine had been out and I raked them up, later, and then I put a little bit of just, not very deep. So, good point. Anybody else?
Does the grass mold, and does that affect things?
Well, that's why you don't want to put it too deep, because it will mold. But if you don't have it very deep, I didn't have any molding. You just put little thin layer on, and it's just enough to keep weeds from getting the sunlight, Yeah. Okay. So, anybody else? Okay, so I have some, one thing I really didn't talk about was putting some flowers in your garden.
Oh, yeah.
Put flowers in your garden because that attracts the bees. And you want the pollination, your certain things like, especially cucumbers and your squashes and stuff like that really need those bees going from one flower to the other to pollinate them. And it just makes it so neat to see bees all over your garden. So I'm trying to put more flowers in my garden. Yes. I have not. I think I've heard something, but I really didn't make it much notice.
That's actually a really good question, and I think some people have different experiences, and I have to use a netting over my potatoes.
And you know
So,
what? I
it's-
have not had potato bugs in several years
You haven't
now.
had any? Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah, it decimates the leaves at my place, and also I get the little beetle too. So you just put like a hoop and then floating row cover or sheer.
Yes. You, Alice, go ahead. Draw.
So he planted garlic. Does that help?
You have what? Just a second. Can you get Kevin right there?
Oh,
So we can hear you on the video.
okay. I have the lawn from Hades. And
Oh.
I have moles all over it, and I tried using castor oil. It works fairly good, and I used more of it around my house than any other place. But what's a cheap way to get rid of moles? Because castor oil is expensive.
Cats.
Castor oil.
Cats.
I'm sorry.
Cats are great for moles.
Oh, cats.
If you adopt some stray cats.
Okay, you've drawn another one. Susie?
Oh, yeah.
You get to
I
pick.
have plenty of those around, but
Yeah.
for some reason, they're not getting all of them. It's very popular.
Okay, well,
with moles.
who's the next one?
Do they stay near your place?
Yeah, they do. They're out in they're feral.
Yeah, when we lost some of our cats
Oh, Reggie.
to old age, we noticed the mold
Okay.
population just took off. And so when we adopted some more barn cats and gave them a comfortable place to hang out, just for fun, they'll
Okay.
take out the moles
One
too.
more,
So,
three more.
Yeah, unless there's, yeah, I know, it's kind of sad.
Kevin. You, okay. Okay.
This one has no name. It looks like a guy's handwriting.
I have no idea.
You want me to run that around?
It
Yeah.
might be David's. Check with David. He said he didn't put his name on. This one is Emily.
Oh, Emily. Okay. There you go. Okay. Well, I'm thankful that each of you came tonight, and I hope that it was helpful. I know it was deep. I know it was deep, and I know you're going to go home, "Ah," but
The handouts are always good.
yeah,
From last year, I keep going back to them.
right. Keep your handouts. Put them in a safe place, you know. Yes.
And check the website periodically. We're improving it. Those videos are really important if you are still learning about gardening. We've simplified a lot of things in the first two videos.
Yeah.
And this time it was a more advanced class. It was a lot more detail specific, but there's demonstrations, there's equipment that you'll see. There's just a lot of explanations of what to do to get yourself started. And there are links as well as where to go to find
Right.
more information.
And the reason we did the lost skills, all you do is Google lost skills Edwardsburg, and on your flyer today, you should be able to find it.
And it
Or
has-
you can Google Edwardsburg SDA Church and go under community classes. But the fastest way is just lost skills Edwardsburg. Goes right-
Eventually, we hope to have all the handouts for all of them. We just
Yeah.
haven't gotten them all. And there's some on auto mechanics. There's one on auto mechanics. There's one on survival skills. There's other interesting ones
Yeah.
worth checking out.
So, yeah, but keep these because all these links, watch these things from Charles Dowding. He is really, really good. And all of those links are really pretty good. The other person who's really good in here is Elaine Ingham. And I put some other things in there. Oh, one thing that, yeah, on the top, right under resources, this is the Audioverse app. And you can find all kinds of stuff on there. This refers to the conference that was given by there's a group of Adventist farmers who are working together, Seventh-day Adventist farmers, and they, and gardeners, and they really promote people having their own gardens and stuff. And they have some really good classes, and I've been listening to a whole bunch of them. And that's where I got a lot of my information too. So.
How do you find that?
Right here, you should have the instructions to find it. Just put Audioverse app on your phone and you can get it that way. Okay? Very good. Thank you so much for coming. I want to say another word of prayer because I'm just thankful to dear Lord, thank you so much for helping us through this class. And Lord, the miracle of being able to grow our garden and working with you. And I know that things aren't as perfect as you created them in the beginning because of sin. But Lord, we know that we can learn from you. You will help us as we grow our gardens. And I thank you and praise you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay.
And I'm sorry we didn't have any snacks or drinks today, but if you're thirsty, we do have some bottled water for you, so
Yeah.
please help